Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this Thursday afternoon. As always, it's my absolute pleasure to be with you today. And I'm not going to be lecturing today. I'm actually going to be taking your questions. So I'm going to be taking your questions just in the audience today. So if you want to submit a question, how we do that here, because we're actually streaming today on 3 different platforms, YouTube, actually 4, YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and then my private platform. So that's too many different places to gather questions from. So if you want a question submitted, just go and follow the link in the chat. And that will bring you to a submission form on my website where all the questions are submitted. And then the mod can grab that and send that to me. And today we'll probably go for at least a few hours so that we can get through a lot of material. And that's pretty much that. So we've had the forum open for already about an hour, and we've got some questions we can start off with. All right. So this question is from James, and you said, "You've said before that stories and fairy tales are a remnant or remembrance of a way of knowing prior to this epoch. Do you think symbolic stories like this will still be important for humanity's spiritual evolution in the future?" I do. And in earlier periods, humanity used to communicate through myth and through story. And this is actually a reference to and a mechanism of what in anthroposophy is often called the old lunar consciousness, or the old lunar picture clairvoyant consciousness, which is that we used to operate through pictures, through symbols, through archetypes, and then having those pictures and symbols and archetypes interact with each other in symbolic myths. And so this is where you get the idea of someone like the sun hero, or certain dynamics that seem to play out in different myths over and over and over again. And that was actually carried on in mystery schools, where you would see what initiation would be in a mystery school. And this is clear with Freemasonry as well, which is not necessarily a great example, but what would happen in an initiation is that you would actually play out or act out different myths or different historical events that had been archetypal and turned into myths. And that's actually how initiation would happen in different mystery schools. It was surrounding a myth. And the myth is also an inner process. So by reading the myth, by interacting with the archetype, by playing it out, you would actually develop an inner process. So almost like an inner technology, or an inner process would be realized in you. And so now, especially at our point in development, which is, significantly later, we're actually becoming more aware of the process itself. And this is where spiritual science comes in, where you still understand the myth, you still understand the archetypes, you still understand the beautiful purpose of picture consciousness, and things like that. But now we're actually understanding the mechanism itself. We're directly understanding it as spiritual science. And so spiritual science isn't like the removal of the picture consciousness that characterized the lunar development of man. It's the synthesizing of that with understanding the direct science of the thing, the mechanisms in which the inner process works, or the universal laws that made that possible. So it's more objective understanding compared to the old lunar consciousness being like a dream consciousness, stories, pictures. And so that's the difference between the very early developments of humanity who operated in picture archetypal form, and then coming into our age of science, which should be spiritual science rather than materialist science. And spiritual science is basically the understanding of that picture consciousness with the integration of the spiritual scientific understanding of it as well. So it's not really getting rid of it, it's a synthesis of that. Okay, this next question is from a member, and I don't read the members' names or usernames for obvious reasons, so I just say member because I am streaming this also on my private platform, so people are submitting from there as well. So this is a member question, and you said, is it possible to exorcise the doppelganger we're born with that Rudolf Steiner describes, or is its hold so strong on us that it will only depart moments before our death, like in the film The Last Temptation of Christ? Good question. So I actually think that understanding the doppelganger and the double and the etheric body is a pivotal esoteric teaching that we have to come into. I think it's underrated and I think it's undertaught. In the Steiner teachings, Rudolf Steiner actually goes into great detail on the doppelganger. And he has a series of lectures that are under the title of the Electric Doppelganger. And there's a book, actually, I think from Temple Lodge, where Rudolf Steiner connects basically the human doppelganger, or the kind of the idea of the harmonic double in anthroposophy. He connects that with the nervous system and also with the electrical system in the body and with the etheric body. Because if you watched my lecture last week, we were discussing how the etheric body is often portrayed as electric. It's portrayed symbolically as lightning bolts in the very ancient Eastern mystical traditions, and even into different Western traditions. There's still the obsession with the lightning bolt. I mean, just look at Nazi esoterica and their obsession with, the Vajra as a not respecting it as an etheric body, but really forcing it into like a technological sense. So there's always been this deep association of electricity and electrical energy, the lightning bolt, with the etheric body. And so Rudolf Steiner goes even deeper into that in his lectures, especially in the book, The Electric Doppelganger. I get into that with my lecture called Electric Apocalypse as well. So if you want more information on that, there is no shortage of it. And so how the etheric body works is that it's actually really fascinating, because sometimes you go back and you think about all of these seances, these spiritualist seances that were going on at the turn of the century, and these mediums that could basically manifest all of this crazy technology. They could, or not technology, but things, and they could apport a coin, or they could move something in the room. Now, there's a lot of charlatans, and a very small percentage were actually real, but how they would do that was actually through their etheric body. And so the etheric body is basically like in between spirit and matter. Basically, that's the part of the Earth's energy sheaths, and also our own, that is in between pure spirit and pure matter. And so you can learn to kind of see the etheric body also as being sort of a bit of a mirror as well. And so when you're having a spiritual experience in your own etheric body, or in the etheric mass of the earth, it kind of works as a mirror, in that you kind of see what you are, and out of the etheric mist will sort of pop out what's called a doppelganger, or a double, and it will always represent something that's going on within you. And so, in the larger collective sense, we have a doppelganger that's called the harmonic doppelganger. That's a collective doppelganger that we all have. And that's different than like you interacting with an angel, or like a demonic entity that is attaching or connecting with you based on your own personal energy. This is a collective doppelganger that we all have based on the initiation of the time that we face. And so this is called the Ahrimanic doppelganger. And Ahriman is Ahriman. And so this doppelganger basically enters into your body at your birth. And it's kind of like a fallen angel sort of presence that works through you. It's an harmonic entity, an harmonic presence that is present within every human being, that we have to basically overcome. And this is the idea that there's a devil on your shoulder and an angel on your shoulder, and that they're the catalyst for your evolution. So the moment that we're born, through the electrical system and nervous system, there is basically what you could call like a negative harmonic doppelganger, which is kind of like really about, will, unmitigated will and force and might. And it sort of enters into our form, and it has an influence on us. It can't control us, because we are, you're supposed to be developing your individuality in your eye, but it's present within us. And also you'll find this as being called harmonic spirits, right? And so it basically has a hold on you as long as you're alive. And then not until you pass away does the doppelganger have to leave your system, because it no longer has a form. Okay. Now, in earlier periods, the doppelganger was a reptilian form. And that still exists, as the idea of like reptilian aliens. This is not an alien thing. It's actually another doppelganger of humanity. So basically, the last part of your question was, does it hold so strong on us that it will only depart moments before our death? Basically, it is not something that you're supposed to like exercise from you. Like the harmonic doppelganger is not something that you want to eschew out of you. It's something that you're learning from. So it is why, in part, we incarnate here on the planet Earth, which is part dark and part light, is to experience that and to overcome it. So we don't want to like eschew it out of our system, because we're supposed to be transcending it. We're supposed to be overcoming it. We're supposed to be integrating it. So that is how we become individuals, really. and how we evolve. So it doesn't leave until, technically, until you pass away. But you can arrange your life in such a way that through how you live, it doesn't have this massive hold on you. You know, our whole lives, we're going to experience negativity. We're going to experience darkness. We're going to experience maybe even demonic energies, right? But the whole point of that is so that we can develop an understanding of that, a resilience to that, and eventually make it so we have such a strong development of our I and our individuality that it doesn't have any effect on us. That's the point, right? In order for us to get there, we have to interact with it. So, ultimately, sometimes people's harmonic doppelgangers basically take over their whole personality, it takes over their life, and they don't have very, very much awareness of it. And then, you know, some people are very awakened and they have a sense of what that harmonic energy feels like, and they are transforming it. So it really just depends on the person. Okay, this next question is from Northbrook. How does the Christ being interact with us in a way we can perceive? And how come people have various degrees of experiences with him? I read of people having visions, conversations, but I get nothing audible or visible or visual, just intuition and nudges. So this is exactly how spirit operates. You're not experiencing anything that's unusual. Um, you know, I think the biggest hurdle that we can put in our way when we want to have a mystical experience is to demand that it be obvious. I cannot count how many people and how tragic it is when we are wanting a spiritual encounter, but then expect that spiritual encounter to feel material and to manifest in the most material way possible. So it has to be like a visual experience, you know, it has to be a completely audible experience. It has to knock your socks off. And it's like that's actually denying the process of spiritual awakening. That's actually not how it happens. Very, very, very rarely. And usually when that happens, it is people feel like they're having a mental breakdown when that happens. So how the vast majority of people experience spirit is as though it's their own thought, as though it's their own feeling, as though it's their own mind. And only through a very strong meditation practice where you're observing your thoughts, you're observing your emotions, you're observing your inner world, do you begin to notice a difference between basically messages from spirit that are really, really angelic and then other things going on, or your own thoughts. So especially with the Christ being, and how it operates is basically around the experience of Paul at Damascus. So in the future, people will begin to have their own experiences with Christ. And these may come in dreams, these may come as knowings, these may come as points of clarity. They may be very, very, very subtle and grow over time. It just may be a distinct feeling, like a little bit different. But Christ is going to appear to people who are open and who are ready. And that's how they're going to know him and understand him. So this is very different than, you know, a lot of people think that there needs to be, you know, some kind of text that's discovered or some kind of like evidence for Christ's existence. That's not actually how Jesus and the Christ is going to be understood. That's an intellectual game. That's a materialist mind game. How any spiritual phenomenon will be understood, including the Christ, including Jesus, and really any great masters that even came before, is through spiritually experiencing them. Okay, so we're in a world that's so materialistic at this point that it's like we want all this material evidence, material proof, when that would actually only lock people further in a material idea. And so the only way you can truly know Christ, really, and even Jesus, is to have an experience with them. And to do that, you have to open your heart to prayer. You have to acknowledge them in your life, and open yourself to that, and meditate and pray and notice it within you. You have to notice that it's already there within you. And that brings you into the experience as you can handle it over time. And so it's really about having the spiritual experience. There is no document, there's no historical document. There's no material thing that's ever going to prove to you that Christ existed or Jesus existed or who he was. The proof is the nature and the power of that being in the astral, the spiritual world upon you. But you have to let that happen. You have to let that occur, that flowering occur. And as free beings, you have to do that through your own free will. So that's the process. And it's a deeply inner process. It's not an external process. It's not going to knock your socks off and do that. It's going to be something from inside of you that you have to draw your attention to and build up within you over time, because that's how you are able to remain sovereign in that experience and use that energy to develop, to heal yourself and to inspire yourself, as it has to come from within. That's the whole point. That's the initiation of Christ. Okay. Paulette. Demonic parasites. Their machine-like inorganic world uses their tech blueprints to make our organic world machine-like for easy interference through synthetics. How do they benefit from this possession? Isn't this the New World Order? Yes. So the key to understanding the parasitical nature and the demonic nature is to understand the underworld. So the hell realms or the underworld are characterized by being machine-like or without a soul. It's automatic. And then when you get into the human kingdom or the natural world, then you have the development of the eye, the development of the soul, but it's not quite angelic yet. And then you have the supernatural celestial world, which is the angelic kingdoms. So I'm going to say that one more time. We have the subnatural world or the underworld, or what's considered the hell and purgatorial realms that are portrayed as being in the earth. This is the nature of those realms is robotic. So it's like automated. There's no soul, there's no eye. It's just a machine, right? That's what the underworld is like. Then when you get into the natural world, so that's subnatural, the subnatural world. Then when you get into the natural world, you get into developing the eye and developing the individuality and developing the soul. So it's not quite there, but you're developing that. And that's our natural world, the earth. And it has the influence from the hell realms or from the underworld all the time, trying to mechanize it, trying to automate it, trying to remove the eye and pull it into that system of death and destruction, okay, which is a machine world. And this is why I like to pick it out when people start to call the cosmos a simulation. It's not a simulation. Okay, this is trying to observe the entire world in an inhuman way, which is of the underworld. That is a perspective that's of the subnatural world, because we are in a world of beings. We're not in a machine world, okay? It's not a simulation. That's only looking at the lower astral plane and the earth and the underworld. That's not including the celestial kingdom, because if you did, you'd see that we're inside of a great being, okay? We are the microcosm of a macrocosm that could be understood as the great being, which is the Christ. We are within that, okay? So in order for us to actually integrate and understand our own body, we have to use that system, okay? So ultimately, you have, again, the lower world, which is like a machine, right? There's no eye, there's no consciousness. You have the natural world, which is the development of the eye. It's the natural world. And then the supernatural celestial world, which is the angelic supernatural world, full of essentially superhuman entities, which we call angels. And that's the structure of the cosmos and esoteric science. So whenever you get like a demonic entity, Paulette, and I like how you use the word demonic and the word parasite, because that's how demonic entities operate. There's no ability for a demonic being to actually get energy unless it's through the natural world. They don't have an eye, they don't have much of it, and therefore they have to parasitically attach to people in the natural world and the earthly plane and basically suck energy from them. And so that's why you hear about, things like demonic attachments, you hear about possession, you hear about people that are empty shells and background people, which are just individuals that have been taken over by beings from the underworld, from the subnatural world, that are demonic, and they fall into the machine system. So when someone becomes possessed by a demonic entity, they start to fall into the influence of that machine-like existence of the underworld. Now, different mystics were describing the underworld as a machine and as automated since before we even had technology. This is how Rudolf Steiner was describing it. Gurdjieff was describing it this way. Casey had described things in this way. Various different teachers were describing that demonic entities in the underworld or the subnatural planes, they behave like robots, right? They behave like basically predatory animal robot things. It's the worst of everything. And so when you have a bunch of people on the planet who don't have an individuality, don't have an eye, and that eye especially is not glorified by aligning it with Christ, then you start getting people who operate in this weird demonic hive mind. And this is why you can't look at someone and say, oh, this person is, just like me, because on the inside, they could be connecting with very different forces than you, right? So this is like this is like that movie They Live, exactly, where he's taking off the glasses and looking around and seeing these zombies everywhere. This is true. This is really how it is. So that is the description of, that's a very good symbolic example of possession. And so how do these demonic entities benefit from possession? Well, they get to basically set up systems on Earth that are vampiric, and they get to drain the Earth of all of its light, all of its life force energy. They get to feed on the soul essences of people. That's, and basically how that will eventually come to pass is they'll create a kind of like false ether, which is a mix of like electricity and sort of human energy, and they'll try to basically enter into it. And this is also called the eighth sphere, essentially. So it's really important, as we move forward in, 2025, 2026, going into 2030, it's really, really important that we pay attention to technocracy and, these different individuals that want to, tell people that our only option is basically to develop this machine world. And our only option is basically to choose the lesser of evil AIs. That this technocracy, that this new technological world, this internet digital world is the only future we have. So you better just, not fight it. This is a sickness, and we have to really watch that, and you have to be very aware of that, because it's not true. And that is directly how the subnatural world operates in human beings. It's how the demonic world operates. So we have to be aware of that. You don't want to be sold a false paradigm and a false world that, depletes you. That's how serious it is, Okay. Hi, Gigi. I remember once you mentioned you had done a quantum healing hypnosis session, and I think it was during one of your Men in Black videos. What's your thoughts on the matter now? I'm interested in a session and am unsure how I feel about it. Yeah, so I have a video that I talked about the Men in Black, and I've had several experiences with the Men in Black, lots actually. And it's not uncommon at all for people who are spiritually awakening or researching things spiritually to have these experiences, which are kind of astral experiences. Sometimes they manifest physically, but a lot of the times it's an astral experience. And I had several experiences with them that I talked about. And when I was giving that example, I was pretty new to the experience and actually pretty shocked because I was very naive and I didn't think that it was possible. I didn't think that it was possible to, have somebody invade your space like that. It just didn't even occur to me because so many times when you're just studying spirituality, it's like I feel like there's like a lullaby phase where you don't think about that. And so I felt very violated that like someone could be watching me, or you can have this weird MIB experience like in your home. You're like, what? Is there no privacy? And so that was something that it took a while for me to adapt to. And so I actually had a friend who was not a quantum hypnosis practitioner, because quantum healing hypnosis is a trademarked kind of regression therapy by, I believe, Dolores Cannon. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. But that is not just regression hypnosis. It's a special kind of hypnosis that you go under for 3 hours. It was developed by Dolores Cannon. This was before Dolores Cannon had really even picked up. This was this was a long time ago. This was before I had even heard of Dolores Cannon or any of that became popular. This was a long time ago. And so it was just a normal regression session because I had a friend who was a regressionist, and they said, listen, let's go and let's see what happened to you, because obviously this is really weird. You could be blocking some of it out. And so I talk about that in my MIB video. And so the heart of your question is not for me to repeat my MIB experience, but what are my thoughts on quantum healing hypnosis? So I've never done Dolores Cannon's quantum healing hypnosis. I've heard good things about it. I think ultimately it's just a form of hypnosis. Like I mean, I've heard people have had good experiences with it. I've heard people have had bad experiences with it. I think it just depends on the practitioner. It's like anything. The only thing I can say is that when it comes to Dolores Cannon, I don't find myself resonating with obviously any material that says that human beings are created by aliens, or that human beings are alien hybrids. I've already lectured on that until the cows come home, so I wouldn't be able to find any overlap in her work there. But yeah, that's what I would say. I do think that you can have regression hypnosis be incredibly powerful and healing in your life. I know that there have been cases where people have had certain health problems, certain mental and emotional problems, certain problems with relationships, and they were not having any luck through traditional means. But then when they went into regressive hypnosis and they saw a past life that was kind of the root, or another angle was revealed as to why this issue was existing in their soul, it was actually really helpful. So sometimes having that soul perspective of like, how a certain problem has appeared life after life can be really instrumental, especially to someone who is already spiritually inclined, that already thinks big like that. So I think that regressive hypnosis can be very powerful. But I think, like anything, it's going to depend on your practitioner. You have to really find somebody who's good and who you resonate with. And yeah, that's what I would say there. Okay. This is from a member. Please share your insights on practices to establish a direct relationship with Christ. Okay. So the number one thing to know about Christ is that Christ exists within your heart center. So Christ is already within you. There's no need to draw down Christ into your being. There's no need to draw him in. There's no need to draw anything into your being, actually. There was a period in early times, which is really classified as early paganism, when humanity had a different spiritual process in which humanity would draw things into their being. They would draw this in or they would draw that in because they were very pure comparatively. And there was a different spiritual system operating within humanity at the time. That's how we were learning. That's how we were kind of cataloging and understanding things. But now everything is within us. And so we find answers and most of all connect with Christ through going within. So there is no need to really go outside or imagine that something outside coming in. It's really already there. You know, everything is already within us. And the whole thing is just that if we live a very distracted life where every spare moment we're scrolling on our phone, we're avoiding quiet time, we're avoiding our inner world, then it becomes very difficult to actually sense Christ within because we're cramming our day with basically distractions. And so the number one thing to not sense the Christ essence in your heart is to live a distracted life and to funnel yourself into one activity after another, to not have a meditation practice, and just to live a life of avoiding your inner world. Right? Again, at our development, it's about inner experiences. It's not about having something tear you out of your paradigm to prove itself to you. That's not what spiritual experience is. That's ego. So what we have to do is we have to understand that everything actually already exists within us. And that we have to bring ourselves to first and foremost acknowledge that, because only when we acknowledge that that's the paradigm can we begin to work within that paradigm, that reality, right? If you think that everything's outside of you still, then you're not going to be looking in here, right? So you have to acknowledge first and foremost that everything is within you, including Christ. Okay? Then you have to notice it. Acknowledge and notice, and you have to begin to feel it. And how it feels is like love, like peace, serenity, warmth. These are the feelings and sensations that let you know that your body is beginning to pick up on the Christ essence. So you can also begin to develop those and focus on, not hiding in those emotions, but just becoming more serene and becoming more peaceful, becoming more inward will allow you to sense it a lot more. Also, prayer, prayer and mantra helps a great deal by calling the Christ essence up within you. By really speaking it. The word is very, very important. Our thoughts, our mind is creating our experience. And so you have to have prayers where you invite Christ into your life. Call Christ into your life, acknowledge Christ within you, and then you'll begin to experience that. And so you have to find the prayers that work for you. I always love Not I, but Christ in Me. And just find the different prayers that really resonate with you where you are. Everyone has their own prayer to find. And that will begin to ever so slightly shift your mind and orient your being to be in attunement with Christ. And the more in attunement you are with Christ, the more like him you become. And that's the goal of life, basically. Okay, this is from a member again. The time of Atlantis appears significantly shorter in length than Lemuria, and our current post-Atlantean age appears significantly shorter than Atlantis. As we and the Earth densify, does time do the same? The Bible speaks of days being cut short. Yes, exactly. So you also have not only there being a compression of time within the epochs, you also have a compression of size. So when you think about how big people were, like in the Lemurian epoch, they were huge. They were giants. I think Blavatsky places them at like 21 feet tall. And I can't remember what Steiner places them at, but we're looking at human beings being significantly larger in both the Lemurian and even part of the Atlantean epoch. So the time is a little bit different. The length of time is different. The size is different. And there's all kinds of shifts that happen as you go from epoch to epoch to epoch, because you have essentially every epoch, you have a recapitulation of the prior epoch, and then something new comes about. And so there's a shifts in form, there's shifts in consciousness, and time begins to accelerate and condense as well. Okay. Hi, Gigi. Do you foresee a cyber attack blackout event this year? It's an election year, and many have speculated this type of thing coming. Would love to see a 2024 events video. Well, I've made some predictions about 2024, but I usually don't do like prediction videos because a lot of the time I feel like this is just probably me, but I feel like just giving predictions is about people wanting to feel in control of the future. And so there's something about just doing pure prediction videos that feels like it's not the highest form of like spiritual discussion. I think the discussion should be around what do we want to create for 2024? How do we do that? What are some maybe overall potentials? But just doing like pure predictive videos, I find it. I would find this even when working with clients when I had a private practice, which is like usually we want a prediction because we have a bunch of fear over our life, and we want a prediction in order to feel safe or feel in control. So many times when psychics give these predictions, it's feeding a desire for people or the world to feel in control because the future is always frightening. And my argument is that while giving predictions is fine, I do it often, just doing pure prediction videos or just focusing on it too much, I think can have students or the audience just wanting security when the only real form of security is going to become through personal development and a relationship with God. So the only security we're ever going to have in the future is our development and is our spiritual development. So that's sort of why I don't make prediction videos, but I will oftentimes, and members know this, I will, if I do see something coming, I will not hesitate to share it. But as for just sitting down like Sylvia Brown with a piece of paper, that's like, there's going to be a train crash, you know, there's going to be this or that. I tend to not do videos like that. But it does not mean that I will not give predictions. I absolutely will give predictions, and I do give predictions. You know, in a lot of ways, my In Plain Sight series is pure prophecy. That whole series is prophecy. Mars Mysteries is pure prophecy, and a lot of series I've done have just been pure predictive or my predictions. But as for just doing like a year video thing, that's kind of where I tend to not operate from. However, what I will say is that 2024 is an interesting year. It's an election year, so anytime you have an election year, you can absolutely count on lots of political humiliation for people. I mean, people will have files of blackmail material, and no one will do anything about or have files of crimes people have committed. And no one will do anything until an election year. Nothing will be brought forward until an election year. So election years are always full of drama. It's always full of manipulation. And oftentimes some of the worst crimes don't even come to light until it's being used to manipulate the other party. So I absolutely think that there could be a cyber attack or a blackout event this year. I think that there could be lots of things going on. I think that I think that all of the stuff going on in the Middle East right now, I think a lot of the factions would like to be a lot worse, but I think that there isn't a lot of support for I think that there isn't a lot of support for war anymore. I think a lot of people are waking up, and I think that there is a hesitancy to do any massive events, because I do think that the different political factions are seeing that it's almost like people are too divided and they're not sure which way things would go. And I've seen different operations start, like, for example, the UFO operation, the famous, we're going to reveal UFOs, but it's really an opportunity for like private defense contractors to bring out advanced technology kind of thing. So I've seen that operation begin probably like 3 or 4 times, if not more times, and then pull it back because the public is too chaotic and they're not certain that they can swing this event in the way that they would like it to be. And so they'll back off of it and then they'll try to reintroduce it again. And so I think that that's happened a lot with different political factions where they've tried to do an operation and maybe it would have worked 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. But now I feel like it's a lot harder for them to pull off certain operations because people are so much more awake and aware. And so I definitely think that they will probably pull some kind of thing like that. Whether it's going to be that and before the election, I couldn't say. Um, I would just say that it's probably going to get hairier the closer and closer and closer we get to it, is what I would say. How I view the election personally is I don't see any party or any individual as being the great liberator of humanity. I don't see that with the political right. I don't see that with RFK. I don't see that with, unfortunately, the left or anyone. I feel like we have a ways to go before we have a leader that's truly, truly containing the impulse necessary to lead. And we're still seeing different factions, unfortunately, battling it out. That's just my personal opinion. So I think we're going to see that obviously this year. And yeah, I think the real answer is that we have to start to be more independent. We have to start forming our own, growing our own food, forming our own communities. And I think more and more becoming more independent and doing our own thing. That's what I feel like the answer is more than anything, is actually extracting our power so much from this system. I think that's the ultimate game changer. But that doesn't mean that you can't be active politically. It doesn't mean that, you shouldn't be at all. I think that you should choose the lesser of two evils. Why choose the most evil? But I'm just saying that, we are still in a very, very, very corrupt political system. And we're still looking at different factions fighting. And we will see, obviously, a very aggressive 2024. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a cyber attack or if there's a blackout or anything like that at all. Because again, there's been a lot of weird things. I mean, what was going on with the weird spy balloons that were going on I mean, I just saw an X-Files episode the other day where it was all about Dead Horse, and there was some kind of submarine down or some kind of UFO over Dead Horse. I think that's actually where the balloon was. So there's all kinds of different operations that are attempted to come to pass. But again, I do feel like humanity is a little too chaotic right now for a lot of these big moves to, I think, come to pass in the way that they would like them to. But eventually it's going to get to a point where they will just start doing them. And so, yeah, as we get closer to the election, though, we're going to see that stuff heat up more, obviously. But I also have noticed that a lot of people are losing interest in politics. A lot of people are beginning to focus on other things because it's just becoming very exhausting when there's no candidate that actually genuinely is containing the energy of real leadership, real sacrifice, that's really containing the real impulse to lead, right? So it's very exhausting um, following things and trying to participate in this political system, which that is not in, where there is, this is just my opinion, but that's how I see it, when you're always choosing the lesser of two evils. Okay, next question is from Kate. Can you speak more about the consciousness of animals, especially the difference between what they experience and what we experience and understand as memory? This is a great question. So, in esoteric science, there's different kingdoms of life. There is, at the most simple or the most basic foundational, there is what's called the elemental kingdom. And there's actually 3 subsections of the elemental kingdom, and they all have their own kind of consciousness. And these are the beings that are basically give our world life, right? These are the elemental beings, okay? And then above that, you have the mineral world or the mineral kingdom. And that is basically compared to like a dreamless sleep, right? And also the planet Saturn. And then you have the plant kingdom. Okay, the plant kingdom is more alive, and it's kind of like a very deep, dreamy sleep. And this is associated with old sun, or almost like an old solar development. And then you have the animal kingdom, which is essentially a group soul. So animals have every kind of animal operates in basically like a group soul, like a hive mind. And that's actually very parallel to how humanity developed up until Lemuria around that time. And so animals operate not as individuals, they don't have their I. Humanity doesn't get that until you go into the human kingdom, which is above the animal kingdom. So as soon as the soul essences move up in development into the human kingdom of life, then you get your I and your individuality, and you go forward from there as an individual, able to have your own personal memories, your own personal experience, evaluate things from a objective personal perspective. So animals don't have the sense of I or objectivity as humanity does. Now, that being said, there's variation within the animal kingdom. Some animals are a lot closer to that and have a lot more human-ish traits and have a little bit more of a developed soul essence, if you could say. And that is usually associated with dogs, cats, horses, and elephants, actually. Then there's other animals that have sort of a lesser connection with humanity and are obviously a bit more primitive in their operating. So ultimately, any animal will operate in kind of a collective knowledge, a collective hive mind, a collective memory. They operate differently. And oftentimes, we as human beings project our level of development and our way of operating onto animals. We project our humanness onto animals and things like that, which can lead to misunderstandings about how they actually operate and what they're capable of. But yes, the animals are in a different kingdom of life than human beings. They're not lesser, as in less important, but they don't have the eye developed. They don't have an eye. So they're operating from a group soul, a group memory, and kind of like a group mind. So when they pass away, they pass into their group soul essence. And in that way, it's very similar to what humanity was operating like when they were in their animal recapitulation in the lunar phase and in the Lemurian phase. Okay, this is a member question. When we heal ourselves, is that healing vibe translated forward and backwards in time through generations? I've heard this from New Agers, but it does not make sense if each of us has an I, an individuality, and our own darkness to confront. Your insights. Yes. So I think sometimes the New Age can go a little bit too quantum, too out of body, too out there. So how I view this is that it's an impulse. So when you heal yourself, so when you heal yourself and you transform something within you, it does go into sort of your, I guess you could say, it does have an effect on your ancestry, but it's not an overwhelming effect. It's an impulse that they receive on a certain level of their being. And you can, with it, because you have an eye, you can either accept that impulse and receive it, and you can have it work upon you, you can use it, or you cannot accept it. So having an eye means that we have the free will to receive a spiritual impulse that basically enters our field, or we can deny it. So just because it's just the same thing as like receiving a prayer from someone. You can receive a prayer and a blessing, and it can actually help you a great deal, or you can kind of deny that prayer. So it's the same thing with ancestral healing. You can provide impulses to your ancestors, right, that have passed on. You can provide impulses to them on a certain level of their awareness, and they can choose to accept that or not, right? But it's not like because you've healed something within yourself, they're like, oh no, here it is, here's the impulse, and it just takes them over or anything like that. It's like there's an impulse that they receive, and they can either choose to work with that or not work with that, really. And also, it's not just like your ancestors. When you transform something within yourself, that healing power becomes operational in you, and therefore operational in the collective consciousness as well. So just by people engaging with you, speaking with you, they can actually begin to almost like fire. They can begin to pull that from you. They can begin to know that within themselves by being around you. So it's not just like your ancestors or a different version of yourself in the past or the future. It's anyone around you can be greatly affected by your energy. So we absolutely have the ability to be an impulse, to provide an impulse. But, as human beings, we also can completely ignore it, deny it, put walls up, or we can be open to it. So that's where the I comes in, is that we have a choice. Okay, this next one is from Colin Bond. Hello, Colin Bond. Is out-of-body experience proof that we have an immortal soul? Yeah, I think so. I think that, I'll put it this way. There have been so many individuals that have had a near-death experience, and they were staunch atheists, or they'd never thought about the afterlife or spirit. And they have a death experience where they essentially are in their astral body now, which many people would call like your soul. and they're interacting with angels or, having this death experience, they're clearly not in their physical body anymore. Sometimes they're looking down on, an operating table or a car accident or something that's happened, and they're literally looking down on their body and it's dead, and they're existing outside of their body, and they're having an experience that they didn't even think was possible. And so near-death experiences are a kind of out-of-body experience that have proved to many people that there is something after death, and has actually made people unafraid to die. It's given them incredible spiritual powers and spiritual gifts because they they basically began to acknowledge it was possible. And then so just by having an out of body experience, the most common being probably a near death experience, their whole life was changed into a spiritual life because they were finally able to know. But also, experiences of astral projection and lucid dreaming can have the same effect if it's a very deep experience and the individual um, is able to be very conscious in their astral body for whatever reason. Even in dreams or meditations, you can have an out of body experience where it just becomes very obvious to you that the physical world is not the only thing that there is, and therefore you have an immortal soul. Therefore you have an astral sheath in which your eye can operate in, or an etheric sheath that your eye can operate in potentially as well. So out of body experiences have been a major catalyst for people to have the experience of being outside their body, what it feels like. And it's given them a whole different dimension to their life. Absolutely. And a lot of people actually can't come into spiritual awakening through like reading a book or through the intellectual understanding of it. It's kind of like, again, the Paul at Damascus thing, where usually you need that experience. You need that spiritual experience to really um it goes deeper into your mind, into like your entire body, into your entire being, and that's often what people need, and an out of body experience does provide that. Okay, this is a member question, and you said, can you talk more about your new upcoming course? Yes, so I am working on another course. It's basically inner mystic on steroids. It's going to be a extremely deep spiritual development course, and it's going to be good for if you want to learn the foundations, but we're also going to go as deep as you want to go, with modules and lectures that allow you to go as deep as you want to go, but we're also going to establish very strong foundational knowledge on, basically for intuition development and spiritual development. We're going to get into all different kinds of things that allow you to do that. I'm not going to get too into it because I don't want to give it away, but I'm working on writing it and everything now. And there's also going to be a YouTube series that goes along with it, which is why it's taking a little bit longer, is that there's going to be a YouTube series that goes along with it, and it's going to go along with the course. So it's a lot of work, but I'm really proud of it. And it is absolutely the material that I wish I had, 20 years ago. Absolutely. And that's kind of what inspires me to create this sort of course, is what would I have wanted to know, and how would I have wanted that presented when I was just coming into this. And so that's my inspiration. And also, not just that with myself, but over the 16 years now that I've been teaching, what kind of questions do I receive the most? Answering those. What are the problems that I see the most in students? Like, or struggles, not problems, but like what are the struggles they experience the most, the blocks, how to get over those. And so it's basically going to be everything that I know in regards to spiritual development, intuition development in a course. And so as soon as that's ready, I will be letting you guys know. I'm really taking my time with it because it's not really something that is mine. It's something that's more coming through me than something that is like mine. Do you know what I mean? So it has its own life force basically, and I'm just bringing it through, and I don't have much when it's ready, it's ready kind of thing. Okay, this one is from Arthur Cyrus. I have to love everything, even the dark force, because it's the only way to combat them. Also to reunified all the conscience that are in me in love of our creator. Can you share some visual techniques in meditation? Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that you can't fight with yourself. You can't fight with the darkness. You can't like battle it, because then you're going to only get more battles. I think that's sort of the message that you're saying here. And I agree with that. I think that in my life and in everything that I've studied about how to deal with darkness and deal with evil, I think that different circumstances and different situations can call for different things. And I think throughout your life, you'll learn about that with psychic protection, which I will be teaching on in this course as well. But, different situations are going to call for different things from you. And it is the role of the adept to learn basically when to use what techniques when. But the foundational knowledge that you should have is that you can never solve anything with hatred in your heart. And you can never stoop to the behaviors and levels and the attitudes of the darkness itself. And the most powerful thing when it comes to dealing with darkness is actually how you live your life. And I always keep coming back to this because when you live in a way where you're making an effort to be conscious, when you're meditating, again, when you're not allowing yourself to just be constantly distracted by scrolling on screens, the more aware you are in your life, the more quiet you can become, the more obvious your own darkness becomes. And if you're experiencing any darkness in the world, it's absolutely because there's going to be some kind of imbalance in you. That's just how this works. So the only way to really deal with our experience of darkness is to have our goal be personal harmony and balance. That has to be kind of the foundational understanding that you operate from. So I always use also just the asserting of truth, and also often the visualization of the Christ fire. So Satan and darkness, they exist in this world. They exist here, but this is not their world. This is not their kingdom. This is the Father's kingdom. This is God's kingdom. Everything here is in his image. Everything here is of God. Even the darkness is first of God and then rebelled against God. So just affirming that truth is incredibly powerful. We live in the Father's kingdom. Okay. And so when just knowing the dynamics that of really spiritual science is a way of protection, really. Because the first thing that evil will do and darkness will do is to try to give you a different cosmology that places the dark forces at the same level as God. No, that's not true. This is the Father's kingdom. This is God's world, God's kingdom. And the evil forces, dark forces are rebelling against that pure idea, that pure structure. So that's how we experience it. And so a lot of the times, you know, it's very difficult. Like if you're being psychically attacked or you're having a really bad nightmare, it can be very challenging to like tell yourself that you're going to love, like you're going to love that dark robed figure that's trying to give you sleep paralysis. So sometimes you can't always muster up love for the dark side. So sometimes if that's what you're trying, a standard you're trying to hold yourself to, that may not actually be realistic, which is why there's different techniques for different situations, but that knowing the core structure of the cosmos, and that we do live in God's world, is very important. And so yeah, that's what I would that's what I would say there. All right. Okay, Michelle. Hi, Gigi. Thank you for all the Q&As that you do for us. I'm also a member. What do you know about the implants and J and zeta seals or frequency fences to slow down our evolution and keep us stuck in lower consciousnesses? I haven't heard of the words J and zeta seals, but you're calling it frequency fences. So I would say that there's an author named Elena Freeland, and she did a really practical approach on this idea of frequency fences. I think it's Under an Ionized Sky. And I think she has some interviews here on YouTube. I know Dark Journalist has interviewed her. And I think she has probably the most comprehensive, I think, grounded approach to the idea of a frequency fence, and also the idea of the changing of the human structure in order to basically make us synthetic. So the whole idea of basically a big part of Armageddon really is creating a synthetic world that rivals the natural world. So trying to make human beings synthetic. And this is through obviously spraying things in the air potentially. This is through, basically genetic engineering the food into basically something that's not even natural anymore, which we're seeing more and more of. I mean, what is Bill Gates doing with appeal? I mean, this is not, leave it alone. You don't need to make a new apple. You don't need to make a new pear. I say this all the time, just leave it alone. And so there's this movement that really is about synthesizing new human beings, about man playing God. And it's also about creating a false etheric body for the earth, which is called eventually the manifestation of the eighth sphere on the earth. And so really the idea of like a frequency fence is just basically like, let's put a bunch of satellites in the sky that basically create a cloud of radiation to the point that astronomers are having difficulty being able to recognize constellations. There's so many satellites in the sky that really nobody asked for. But you have these technocratic elites that are pushing this forward because they directly benefit from it, right? And so they're creating a frequency fence of radiation. And there is the distinct desire to begin to genetically modify human beings, just like they're genetically modifying food. And this is part of removing the organic nature of the earth and the organic nature of the human being, because everything that we have and everything that we need to evolve is already within us, right? But then if you change our structure and you start to change our being, it becomes harder and harder to sense that God is within us, because now we're adding all of these extraneous processes to ourselves through synthetic things that are made by man that are competing with the natural system. And it can become harder and harder to realize, to hear your own thoughts, to even feel anything within you that's real, because there's all these synthetic processes now competing and trying to take over the natural world. And so that's absolutely on purpose. It's been going on for a while, but it's been realized a lot more lately. And it's absolutely something I talk about in Electric Apocalypse as well, which is creating this electric, through electricity and magnetism and radiation, basically creating what would be called the eighth sphere in esoteric science. And it's like a different competing world, actually, eventually. And as we were saying last time in our live stream here, part of the world is going to go towards, realizing how perfect nature is, even though it's scary, even though it's dangerous, that it is perfect. And we're going to learn to evolve through getting closer and closer and closer to nature, and really taking our role as stewards of the earth and beginning to serve the animal kingdom, serve the kingdoms of life that are beneath us. And that's really when we can become an angel, is when we enter into service to humanity as brothers and sisters here, but also in service of the kingdoms beneath us. So right now we're seeing people who are trying to reach some form of demigodship through basically exerting force over the lower kingdoms of life and trying to control humanity, control the mineral kingdom, control the plant kingdom, control the animal kingdom through genetic modification. And this is the opposite direction, and we will confront it head on in our lives, in the rest of our lives. And it's going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, especially for the people who are moving more and more towards nature. Seeing people who are moving further and further away with it, people are going to start looking more alien. They're going to be starting to create more alien inhuman things, because that's the impulse that we're really confronting. So that's what I would say there. There's a deep spiritual reason why these things are happening, and why everything's about being inhuman all of a sudden. It's humanness and inhumanness. That does seem to be what's going on. Okay, this one is from Jade Nikita, Jade Moon. I am someone who had a precocious cosmic awakening, and I'm currently at university. How to diminish the subtle tension, ache, and isolation I feel when talking to others. How to diminish the trauma of walking in the world unfit. Wow, this is tough. I recently wrote an article called "The Path of the Mystic" on my Twitter and Facebook and everywhere. I posted it, so I highly recommend checking that out, because probably the reason why I think a lot of people don't, spiritually awaken is that spirit knocks and they become introduced to spiritual life and spiritual forces. But they quickly realize that that is a catalyst, that spirit forces are really just a catalyst. It's really just a quickening. It's really just like turning a light on. And as soon as that light gets turned on, as soon as that catalyst hits the human mind, it begins to feel very isolating, because you realize that the way that many people live is not the way that they should live. You realize that the way the world is operating is not how it probably should operate. And so it just begins to seem like, in order for you to be authentic, And in order for you to have a spiritual life, that you have to turn your back on the world. And there's an incredible amount of grief with that, because there's so many dreams, there's so many plans, there's so many things that you had created in your mind, so many attachments that you've based your worth on, that you've based your happiness on, that you've based your joy on. And now, when spirit knocks, it's like, oh my gosh, I've been just basically living in a materialist delusion, and none of those things are probably going to make me happy. But this spiritual energy just feels so new, and I don't know if I can trust it yet either. And so there's always this really difficult initiation period for every person who spiritually awakens, where they feel a divorce from normal life. And this is why so many people turn their back on it, is because they don't feel like in their life they're set up to go through that kind of change. Maybe they're responsible for children. Maybe they have a lot of work responsibilities. They don't feel strong enough. They don't feel like they can turn their back or make certain changes. And so a lot of the time, people will get that first taste of spirituality, but they realize that if they are to continue with it, it may destroy the parts of their life that are a lie, and they may not be ready to do that. It may scare them too much. So it's like, in a way, if you can have that experience earlier, Jade, it's almost good, I think, because you may have enough uncertainty in front of you that you can maybe embrace it a little bit more. Maybe not. Maybe not. But it is the path of the mystic, and it's not necessarily going to get easier. Spiritual, I mean, the first part of spiritual awakening is to realize all of the attachments that you have. Do you know what I'm saying? So the first part of spiritual awakening for most people is a mix of beautiful euphoria and realization and feeling of connecting and finding yourself on one hand. But then with that, there's also, you have to be honest with yourself about where you've lied to yourself, where you have these attachments to the material plane. If you have a relationship that is not healthy, spirit is going to show you that. If you are doing something to yourself, to your body, that's not healthy, spirit's going to show you that. And so that's why spiritual development is difficult, because in order to gain, in order to really integrate your light, you do have to face those shadows, and they go hand in hand. So how I think you can diminish that is, I would say that I would work upon confronting any ideas that you have to fit in and that you have to be the same, and focus on interacting with people in the world very simply from love, from compassion, from kindness. Not every conversation has to be a deep dialectic on whether God exists and what you think about this religion or that religion. Most of our interactions can be mundane, and just keep that about being loving, being kind, being caring, being warm, and that's good enough, you know. And even if people start to have like a different idea than you, that's okay. What you do is you begin to find people, like groups in your area, or you slowly begin to go to different communities or find people that have a belief system like you, whether that be online, whether you can have that in the town that you're from. Obviously, some towns is easier to find a friend group that is maybe spiritual like you than others, but you slowly want to create a community around yourself that is like-minded and work to do that. But then anyone that you experience or encounter, you want to just be truly spiritual, which just means truly caring and truly compassionate. But there will be a point in your life where you're sort of transitioning, probably friend groups. You may be transitioning to have different kinds of friends, right? As your values may change because now you've turned that spiritual light on, and that's totally fine. That's completely expected and completely acceptable for you to go through this transition. And mourning and grief is so common with spiritual awakening too, because again, we tend to, in the earlier parts of our life, we tend to create expectations for ourselves based on what our parents want for us, what society thinks that we should do. And none of these things often represent us. And so we live a kind of fake life, and we often try to find joy in fake ways. So when you have a spiritual awakening, you have to almost grieve your old life. You have to mourn it. And in that process, your true self comes about, but it can be very painful. But again, you have to try to find a community and find people that do understand you, so that you're not walking alone, and slowly continue growing, and be honest and truthful with yourself, and slow down. And also don't try to like intellectualize things too much or like think about things too much. You just want to be really present with yourself, and that's when the truth arises. Okay, this one is from Maggie. You talked about past human life on Mars, yet Mars is not part of the bell curve shaped planetary evolution process of the Earth. So my question is, where is the Mars stage of planetary evolution located in time relative to the Earth and generally? Okay, so neither Mars or Mercury, or there's some other ones as well, obviously Uranus, Neptune, are technically part of the bell curve Earth chain. So what Maggie's talking about here is the planetary evolution as per spiritual science, which is basically you have Saturn development, old sun development, moon development, Earth development, Jupiter development, Venus development, and Vulcan development. All those planets are considered united developmentally and direct aspects of one another. The planets that are outside of that chain are like reservoir planets. That's how I see it. They're containing developmental forces and energy that has come about through the relationships of the seven spheres with one another. So I'll say that again. So the reservoir planets, and of course their moons, right, come about through the relationship of the seven planets' development with each other. And so eventually, when Earth, the planet Earth, evolves into its stage called Jupiter in anthroposophy, the lesser spheres will be kind of reabsorbed. So they're like a reservoir planet that is like a bridge, a developmental bridge. So Mercury is like a bridge to the higher plane that's in the solar chain, and then Mars is sort of like the one that's a little bit behind, and I would say is part of the black sun chain. So there's not a lot written about this in theosophy or anthroposophy or in the Eastern mysteries, because it's really meant to be a teaching for our time and beyond. It's really meant to come about in the Aquarian age, which is going to be very cosmic. Now, I think a lot of people in a materialist sense are trying to make it about like spaceships and things like that, but really it's about understanding the soul's movement in the cosmos before and after death. This is why Rudolf Steiner says we have to focus on unbornness. This is why Edgar Cayce brought forward the teachings of the planetary sojourns. This is why Madame Blavatsky wrote an entire book in her series on cosmogenesis and the chains, because the age of Aquarius really is about us grasping this properly, not in a materialist sense about aliens and spaceships and science fiction, which is what is most popular, but in the real spiritual sense about understanding death and rebirth. That's the real teaching. And so when you do that, you get to understand that every planet is really a different development of humanity and a different expression of the sun. So the Mars evolution is Mars is technically in a kind of sleeping period now, and it was overlapping, and there was a kind of parallel development happening directly in between the periods of Lemuria and Atlantis. That's how I psychically see it, and that's how I understand it. That was made clear to me. And then, so that's where you get a lot of the impetus for Mars Mysteries and the Mars Line video in my Esoteric Secrets of Disclosure. I discuss Mars in between the Mars sphere and the Martians in between the Lemurian and Atlantean period and things that happened there. Now, I do want to get more into that in the future, but it needs to sort of develop a little bit more before I can go deeper into what that exactly looked like during that period. So Mars is not technically in the 7 planetary chains, but it's a planet that was produced through the activity of the 7 planets relating to each other relative to the Earth. I'll say it that way. And during the transmigration of souls. Now, the transmigration of souls is describing the death process and the pre-birth process, which is that the soul essences come essentially to the Earth at certain times through different planetary spheres. So they're not aliens. Like a soul that is passing through the planetary orbit of Mars before it comes to the Earth, that's not an alien being. That's not an alien. That's a soul essence that's coming into incarnation through the planet Mars for a certain reason. Okay. You also have souls that come in through other planetary spheres for certain reasons. It's one of the mysteries of initiation. So there's essentially a solar chain that has to do with Mercury and the Jupiter development kind of coming from this, and Venus and Vulcan and the sun. That's like a solar chain that's involving Mercury. And then there's like the lunar chain, which Mars is really a part of the old lunar chain. Mars is really caught up with old moon. A lot of Luciferic forces came through into the Earth through the moon and the old moon chain, the old moon world. This was described by even Max Heidel in his work, The Cosmo Conception, or The Cosmo Misconception, The Cosmo Conception. It's been left there. It's been described alchemically as well, I believe, by Mars representing red sulfur. So there's a lot of mysteries around Mars and alchemy and our early development and even Mercury. But we haven't yet in the public begun really discussing what it means, or we haven't in the public gotten to that discussion yet. But that's essentially all I can say there. To answer your question just directly, the Mars stage of planetary evolution, located in time relative to the Earth, that was basically At the end of the Lemurian period, going into the Atlantean period, the Mars influence had a very intense influx and influence in Atlantis, leading to the fall of Atlantis. We're seeing it arise now, which is why Werner von Braun had such an obsession with it. Elon Musk has an obsession with it. There's a real reason why this is going on esoterically. And we're going to have to eventually get to that conversation if we really want to authentically talk about Mars and the planetary spheres. We're going to have to understand their esoteric role and their meaning after and before death to the soul. Okay, this one is from Jose Bova, Brazilian subscriber here. Oh, hello. A long time ago, I started to study anthroposophy, but I felt discouraged when I stumbled upon Steiner say in one of his books that some planets that we see today in the skies are actually not physical. What can you explain? Right. I know the lecture that you're talking about. So the best example we have is the planet Vulcan. So we were just talking about the planetary chain, which is the little bell curve. And the top of the solar arc is a planet called Vulcan. Now, Vulcan is not visible because Vulcan is basically the door. Vulcan is basically, if you can imagine like a volcano, and the volcano, at the top of the volcano, the very spout of it is Vulcan. Okay, so the very top of the volcano is the planet Vulcan, which is invisible to us, but it's there nonetheless. Now, underneath is basically like the other planetary spheres that are more visible in our solar system, and all the machinations of the souls and the essences there. And that's like the inner workings of the volcano. That's the fire, that's the churning, that's the world like this. And then once human beings come into a higher phase of existence, it's like they explode through Vulcan, as though it's lava coming up from the lower world and entering into another one through a solar force. So Vulcan is seen as a spiritual planet because it's really the bridge that leads to yet another developmental system beyond anything that we know, that has to do also with the sun. So there are planetary spheres that are essentially astral, like Vulcan, and they operate in a chain with the rest of the planets, like how I was describing, the machinations of all the like etheric and physical things going on. They lead into, eventually they'll lead into either a downward eruption into the eighth sphere, or they lead into like an upward eruption. So there are astral planets that are existing in the astral plane that are part of the earthly chain. So they're part of the Earth's development, but they're completely astral. And Vulcan is probably the greatest example, but there are others. To get into them too much is to be too confusing, because to really get into the astral planets, you have to have a very good grasp on basically the etheric and physical development, which is understanding essentially resurrection. In order to understanding the astral world, you have to understand humanity's ability to transform into a fully glorified etheric being, which is represented in Jupiter, right? So in order to really grasp that, we have to understand our own transformation first, which is why the information is held back. But there are astral planets that are technically part of the same material chain. If you were to just observe the Earth and humanity was to just keep shedding matter and shedding matter and shedding matter. Now, this would be represented by like, you're starting to get into like the principalities, the thrones, and these very high forms of angels that are beyond time, and they are the zodiac and things like this. So, you start getting into incomprehensible levels of consciousness, from our perspective, but we just know that they're there. Okay. Okay, this one is from a member. And you said, I go up and down between feeling deeply spiritual to feeling deeply detached from spirituality for weeks and months at a time. I don't understand why this happens and feels out of my control. This is planetary, natural, and am I still progressing? Yes. So what often happens is there's a period of your life, or sometimes it can be like a period of the day or week or whatever, however you work, where you will be directly kind of looking at the sun, and you'll be directly developing spiritually. You'll be reading about it, you'll be watching lectures and videos, and then your body will kind of absorb up energy, inspiration, teachings. It could even just be spiritual forces through your own prayer. And then your body will kind of reach its max saturation with these things. And then you have to start to process it subconsciously. And so you'll begin to process it in dreams, you'll begin to process it in your subconscious mind, and you'll begin to integrate it. And then once that happens, you'll come back and you'll probably experience some inspirations. You may experience some subtle changes in your life. You'll experience opportunities in which you can integrate the knowledge that you've just learned. You'll receive little tests and things like that from God. And then you'll be drawn back into it again to learn some more. And so it's absolutely, completely normal to have periods of intense study and prayer, these deep spiritual phases where you'll go very deeply into a certain spiritual topic, because it's like you just have to interact with it. You have to know. It's like you have to be satisfied. You have to understand something, and then you'll absorb it the best you can, and then you can leave it for a while, and it can be a long while. And then eventually your heart kind of guides you back, because it's all about you now processing what you've taken on, which can take time. And so that's totally natural. It's totally normal. What I do in my life, it's like, actually, if you don't take time sometimes away from direct spiritual study and contemplation, it's actually not good for you. And this is something that I've had to realize in my life, making this something that I do all the time, is I have to actually take time away. People will be like, oh my gosh, have you read this author? Have you seen this? Have you done this? And it's like, no. There's a time where I actually have to step away from reading spiritual literature, from interacting, and I just do very mundane things with my hands. I try to do methodical things that have nothing to do with the spiritual world. And what I have found is that my time stepping away from like directly reading all the time makes me so much more effective at teaching, at even taking in information. And so it's actually imperative that you take time away from spiritual study. It's imperative that you have it as something that you're doing. I think everybody needs to have a spiritual practice, which includes meditation and study, but I also think they have to have a time where they separate from that, so you don't get lost, in the abyss, right? Or just so deep into it that it can actually slow you down. So you want to have a life where you have a life outside of constant spiritual contemplation and interaction, where you just focus on things that are more grounded, and that actually accents and complements your spiritual study by allowing you to subconsciously process it and giving you an objective step back. So I actually think that's very healthy. I actually think that prevents ruts as well. Sometimes we get into ruts because we're trying to force ourselves too much into one thing. And having that back and forth is really allows that influx of different energies to come in. All right, this one is from Valerie. Hi, Gigi. I'm new to spirituality and I'm worried that I might believe in something that is not good or that is perverse. What is your advice on receiving the truth when it comes to spirituality? It's so funny because I still do this too, where it's like I have seen and even believed many things that I feel like were not accurate. Um, and even that invited negative things into my life just because I didn't know. And even within me, there's like this fear sometimes where it's like, is this something that you should be investing in, or should you believe this person, or should you go down this track? And there can be a fear, a spiritual fear, because we can only interact with the spiritual world based on our own inner world. And so it's completely about self-trust. But what really gets you going is beyond self-trust to a kind of courage that that no matter what confronts you, you know that if you have Christ in your heart and love in your heart, and that you're genuinely dedicated to being humble and honest with yourself, that eventually, if you are following a teacher that is subversive, or you are coming across some kind of information or something that is subversive, that you will eventually perceive, that you will eventually realize that. So that's actually part of spiritual development. Part of spiritual development actually is to follow a teacher that is no good. And then you're like, oh, wow, okay, that's what that feels like. There's no shame in that. There's no shame in making a spiritual mistake. It's okay. If you were part of a cult and you realized that and you came out of it, that's awesome. Do you know that that gives you a special ability to sense crap? Because you were involved in it. So that gives you the ability to discern when it's around you. So we can't have a spiritual perfectionism. The focus has to be on you trusting yourself because of your devotion to being humble and being honest about what you experience. What really tends to hold us back is when we become egoic, that we can't be wrong, that you create this totally egoic paradigm. That's when we're the most vulnerable to being deceived, right? Because we're not clear. So um, part of spiritual development absolutely is making mistakes. And I know that that's not something that people want to hear, but it's actually the best thing that we can say to each other, because you can recover from them, because within you is the truth. It's not something that you're getting from someone else anyway. Anything that resonates with you from any teacher resonates because it was first within you to create the resonance anyway. So it's not about the fact that you're making a mistake. It's about being able to recover from that and learn from that. That's the most important thing. And that's how we gain discernment, is through making these mistakes. So the other thing that I like to say about receiving spiritual truth is that anytime that you get a teaching from someone, obviously myself included, but anyone, even when you get a vision in meditation, right? There's nothing that says that you have to take that on with bells and whistles and make it your own. You have the power, Valerie, to observe whatever teachings you want. You can read whatever books you want. You can watch whatever videos you want. You can be in a meditation and you can receive information. But that doesn't automatically become your paradigm, your belief system, just automatically. No, you can think about things. You can try it on like a hat and take it off. There's nothing within your psyche that says you have to take on every single spiritual truth that you hear, every single intuition that you receive, you have to take on. No, when you get an intuition and it feels like it's from a force that you don't recognize, what I like to say is just say, that's interesting. If this information is meaningful to me and I'm meant to work with it, let it become clearer. Let it become more and more known to me. You don't have to take on anything that you don't resonate with. You don't have to take on anything even that you do resonate with. So there should always be this distance and the space within your life, within your practice of taking in spiritual information, where you can take something in on a very shallow level first and say, I'm going to let this information work upon me. This could be from a teacher. This could be from an angel, spiritual being that you're not sure of. And you say, okay, I'm going to take this information on and I'm going to let it sort of work upon me, but I'm not going to take it on as my own. I'm just going to sort of gently see how it feels. And then just do that. And over time, if a concept is not parallel, if it's rooted in false light, it will become obvious to you. Right? So it's okay to give yourself space between the information that you're taking in. The more that you have a strong meditation practice where you're developing that Christ power in your heart, the easier it will become to sense truth from fiction. But it's something that we do have to build up, and we should never think that we know it all. That's what I would say there. Because information has a life to it. It has an intelligence to it. It's alive, right? So you can kind of hold it in your being for a moment without taking it on, and it will reveal itself to you as well over time. It'll either be life-giving or life-taking, and you'll begin to see that as you work with these different concepts. It may take months, it may take years, but if it does take years and you do get caught up in something, it's because you had a blind spot, and now you can see beyond it. Now you have a power. Now you've overcome it. That's how this all works. Okay. No matter what you go through, though, you always have God within you and Christ within you to overcome anything that confronts you with that force. So as long as you're dedicated to that and working that in you and through you, you get greater and greater powers of discernment as well. Okay. Okay, this is from Sarah. Do you believe Jesus or the Christ now guides people through the astral? Yes, I do. Once the crucifixion happened, the Christ being began to live and operate into the etheric plane. And that's now where the Christ being is technically operating. And so how that tends to be experienced is as astral experiences, as spiritual experiences. And so a lot of people are having interactions with Jesus and with the Christ in their dreams and in their life. And the only way to become conscious of it is to recognize Christ and to recognize Jesus. Otherwise, they'll just operate as a mechanism, as a force. But when you begin to notice that within you, you'll begin to see it in the world. But yes, they work from the spiritual planes as guides, and it becomes more obvious the more that you learn about them, I would say. Yeah. Okay, this one is from Fix Jupiter. Hello, Fix Jupiter. According to spiritual economy, the different bodies will reincarnate into different persons. For example, Zarathustra's astral body reincarnated into Hermes, and his etheric body reincarnated into Moses. How can we understand this principle with the eye of Jesus? Yes, so I think that one of the biggest things that I feel like we have to understand is the idea of spiritual economy. And I think once we get that, we'll also understand the cosmos as well, because this idea of the merging etheric and astral bodies also happens with planetary spheres as well. And of course, the eye of Jesus also representing the union of the Son and the union of the Christ force, and allowed the eye of Jesus really is part of why we have the Christ essence within our heart at all. It gave everybody the ability to basically use that Christ essence to transform their physical being, their physicality. So it's kind of like that is the initiation that Christ gave to man through Jesus's eye. And I think the best way into this as well, or one of the most interesting things to understand this, is when we were talking about the resurrection mysteries last week, we very, very briefly talked about Jesus as Adam. Now, this is really a deep, deep secret or reality of esoteric Christianity. And so when reincarnation was separated from the Christian doctrine, which it used to exist in the doctrine in Christianity, and it was removed for different reasons. I've spoken about that, why it was removed already. But when it was removed, we sort of lost the deeper spiritual teachings of basically reincarnation and unbornness and all of that. And within that, we kind of lost the soul of Jesus and Jesus's past lives and things like this, which is totally offensive to dogmatists now. But this used to actually exist as a doctrine. And unfortunately, when we lost that, we also lost humanity's sense of initiation, because Jesus is the Son initiate and the bearer of the eye. So it's like when we lost that, we lost a sense of our own initiation, because his life on earth was one big ritual. So Jesus is the Adam soul. And when we see the crucifixion occur much later, we actually see the forging of a new group soul. And this is called the new Adam in anthroposophy. And so through the forging of the Christ with Jesus and all that occurred there was a new group soul that was created that is called the new Adam. And so when we build our etheric body, our glorified body, we're really actually entering into a sense the new Adam, the new form of Jupiter, of the Jupiter development. So all of this is anthroposophy or esoteric Christianity, by the way. If you're listening to this and you're like, what is she talking about? Jupiter, Jesus, Adam. This is all the real deep secrets of esoteric Christianity, is that when we build our glorified etheric body, we are essentially building the body of the new earth, which is also esoterically called New Jupiter or New Jerusalem. But we do that through the Christ being, which Jesus allowed to come through him. And so we're really moving through that, and our eye is in union with that. And we're moving into I would say, this higher phase of life through Christ and through Jesus. And that's the esoteric secret, or the esoteric reality of resurrection and us building our resurrection body. And so there's a lot to be said on the esoteric version of events, of the crucifixion of Jesus, of John the Baptist, of the apostles, and how spiritual economy occurred between them and through them in these different incarnations. In order to understand spiritual economy and the sharing of robes, the sharing of astral and etheric sheaths, we have to understand reincarnation. We have to understand soul groups, and ultimately through Jesus bearing the Christ, it's like a huge soul group was enabled to be created. And we join that when we build our glorified etheric body, essentially. So it's kind of like we all have that sheath, and we're all kind of participating in the spiritual economy through Jesus and the Christ? And that's a very complex question. I hope that makes sense. We'll have to do like a full lecture on spiritual economy and the idea of the sheaths and the robes and the sharing of the robes, because I really do feel like that's what's missing. Okay. Luna, what do you think of the dark feminine archetypes such as Medusa and Lilith? Well, I have spoken on Lilith before. So a lot of the dark female archetypes relate back to the fall of the matriarchal age and the dark inversions of the female personality. Now, one of the things I've noticed is that it feels like we can discuss the dark side of patriarchy all day long and the dark side of the male consciousness in men, but it feels like we're not allowed sometimes in the public to discuss the shadow side of women, in which there's an equally dark and dangerous shadow side to the feminine as there is the masculine. And so all of the dark feminine archetypes are representing the dark side of the female consciousness. So you have like the devouring mother, the dark mother who consumes children rather than births them, right? Who prevents growth in life rather than giving it and nurturing it. You know, you have the idea of Medusa, where if you look at her, you turn to stone, which means like if you look back at that dark matriarchal age, you cannot develop, right? We have to have, and there's a new feminine that is born with every evolution of humanity. That's also what Lilith represents. Lilith is the old wife of Adam, representing old moon, the old lunar consciousness. Eve is the new wife of Adam, representing the new spiritual body of the feminine. So there's always a dark feminine, often associated with the dark side of the moon and the sort of dark pathways of feminine consciousness. And they have many different names, usually follow the same kind of archetypes. But there absolutely is a dark side of the feminine in which humanity experienced to an extreme degree during especially during the Lemurian period, part of the Atlantean period. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. And if we want to be honest and balanced, we have to acknowledge, you know, the balanced feminine consciousness and what that is, but also the imbalanced. It's the same with the masculine. And we do have these archetypal beings that represent that, but they're always complex, you know, they're always portrayed as very human. But, you know, the strict archetypal thing is that you have to acknowledge, I would say, the dark. And when I say dark, I'm meaning inverted. I'm meaning inversions here. So yeah, that's what I would say there. I think that sometimes I think when there is like a damaged feminine aspect, it can be hard to be honest about what negativity there could be in the feminine side, because I know that when I have spoken about Lilith or the dark feminine, there have been people who have been very offended and cannot see really any real dark side to the feminine, which I see as being kind of problematic. So for me, I can see the clear inversion of the feminine consciousness and what that is, and that being connected to old moon. Yeah, we'll just leave that there, because I'm going to get more into that actually in my Venus Mysteries series. We're going to get more into the feminine mysteries and Lemuria, Venus, things like that. We'll get a lot deeper into the fall of the feminine consciousness, the rise of it, the bright, all of that. Okay, Brad Marcus. Have you rejected the idea that some of us are starseeds and and that the many Earth humans are descendants of or connected to humans on other planets. Are you familiar with Elena Danaan and her physically meeting Pleiadians? Have you rejected the idea that some of us are starseeds and that many Earth humans are descendants or connected to humans on other planets? Okay, so the idea of like a soul essence coming from another planetary sphere exists in, occult science as the transmigration of souls. So long before the word starseed was created, there was the teaching of planetary sojourns according to Edgar Cayce, or the state of unbornness according to Rudolf Steiner, the transmigration of souls according to Manly P. Hall and Blavatsky. And so there's always been the reality that the rebirth process involves souls passing through different planetary spheres, and sometimes, but very rarely, different star systems. That's been a staple part of esoteric science since the beginning. There's nothing new about that. There's nothing cutting edge about that. That's just the reality. What has happened is that it's taken on, I would say, a very literalist and materialist approach, where suddenly we're taking the reality that that's part of the incarnation process, that every single soul incarnates through the planetary spheres because the solar system is a school. And now we're calling that aliens, and we're conflating that with like spaceships and technology and this whole thing. It's becoming this whole garish science fiction caricature when there's basically a kernel of truth to it. It's like there's this one spiritual kernel of truth, and then it gets turned into this materialist, literalist, garish science fiction caricature. I think one of the reasons why is because during the last civilization, which is Atlantis, we had a period of very high technology. We need to look no further than the pyramids. Look at the advanced structures we have. Those weren't built by aliens. Those weren't built by our space brothers. Those were built by human beings that we call Atlanteans. Those were built by us. So this whole movement to, say that aliens are responsible for the creation of humanity, that they built all the pyramids, that they're going to come and liberate humanity with all the healing devices. This is just propaganda that is totally designed to bring about a technological revolution through the idea that aliens created humanity. It's basically a delusion. I'm sorry. And so, what was the next part of your question? Okay, so we a lot of the things that are automatically attributed to aliens, like building the pyramids, like, basically every site that the Ancient Aliens show visits and then tells you is aliens, that was built by Atlanteans. That was built by us when we had the technology. We went through a fall, we went through a flood, we went through catastrophes, which happens at the end of every epoch. We forget that we had this incredible ability, but there are certain offshoots that are classically called mystery schools, that will retain the knowledge and oftentimes also retain parts of the technology. Now, so what we have is we have a certain group that you could say is basically living in the shallow cavern systems of the earth, from the Great Flood. And they have some contact with the surface, and they have advanced technology. And they've been claiming that they're aliens and trying to pass off a new origin myth as though aliens are created by humanity. And the reason why that's always told is so that it separates you from your own connection with God. I've gone into this extensively. Watch Esoteric Secrets of Disclosure, watch Mars Mysteries. And so it's not aliens. It's a basically a dark Atlantean breakaway civilization that looks deformed, that are transhumanist, that have advanced technology that want to convince people they're aliens because they don't want you to know what they really are. They're technologists, and they have contact with certain secret groups on the earth that want to bring about a technological revolution, because technology is all they have, because they're spiritually devoid. So a lot of the really popular stuff that you see in the New Age, on Gaia television, on the circuit, I'm sorry, it's rooted in this stuff. So I am not sure what this person is saying, but if it's anything like what I've just mentioned, that is my position on this. The whole thing with the Pleiades has to do with the feminine mysteries, and especially Lemuria. And a certain initiation that people on Earth had. It has to do with souls, not aliens. A lot of things that are apparently physical aliens are things to do with human spiritual initiation and the soul of the human being. It's not an alien. It's not a physical alien person. It has to do with a certain initiation. All the star systems are different initiations. That's how they can be seen properly. It's not about aliens. This is materialism. This is literalism. And I often see this also being blended with basically Babylon all the time. So usually when you go into this idea that, you know, all of the angels are really aliens, it always ends up going back to Babylon. It always ends up going back to the Babylonian period and the reintroduction of Babylonian gods. A lot of the starseed material is Zachariah Sitchin material, which is basically trying to reintroduce the Babylonian religion, the pre-Christ Babylonian religion. So it's really just trying to reintroduce the Babylonian religion through a fallen angel, alien god paradigm. I don't want to comment on someone's work that I don't know, but that's what I would say there. I've lectured extensively on this, so I'll leave it there. Cheryl, please clarify the giant comment. Did you mean that we were giants of old because Lemuria was less dense and the forms were larger, as well as the planet because of density? Yes, basically that's what I meant. That there's a compression and speeding up of time, or not necessarily time, but like the way in which we experience it, or the development. And when we were less dense, everything was larger. And then the more dense and complicated we become, the smaller and denser we become. And so the Earth itself, in very early periods, was massive. You know, in the Saturn development, the Earth itself reached as far as the planet Saturn. And then as it gained matter, it became smaller and smaller. It's the same thing with the human form. And so this is why, you know, we were just talking about aliens and how we have this knee-jerk reaction due to intense propaganda campaigns about aliens, that it's like everything we see that seems to be within a different context, whether it be physically, like if people unearth a hominid that looks differently, it's like, oh my God, it's an alien, you know, or it's because of aliens. Or, you know, you look at a huge giant structure that doesn't seem to be fitting in with Earth now and humanity now. It's like, oh my God, that's an alien. No, it is literally a different developmental period of the Earth in which we were different. And because there isn't a deep understanding of occult science, it's getting out of control, quite frankly, publicly. It's going into delusion and fantasy and science fiction, when we just have to understand Atlantis and Lemuria, the objective development of the Earth and humanity in time and space. Then we will understand the pyramids, we'll understand how they are built, we'll understand why there are giants. And none of it involves, you know, an alien being appearing in a ship. And what we think about that, there is not alien at all. We have to understand the spiritual hierarchies. And anytime there was a being that came from another sphere, the Earth was in a less dense condition, and it is therefore in a different paradigm than we are today. So I've lectured on this already in Esoteric Secrets of Disclosure, so I won't go any further there, but it's all there in Esoteric Secrets of Disclosure. Okay, so yes, essentially it's like humanity has been a different density, right? The planet has been a different density. It's had different conditions of life and form, as we would say in anthroposophy. And this is so important to grasp, because we are moving into even different conditions of life and form. So we have to understand our past in order to really kind of grasp the process in the future as well. So, all right, this one is from Carson. Do you have any diet that you recommend we eat? I've heard alkaline-based, vegan, vegetarian, but I'm wondering if you have any knowledge on the matter. Well, I wouldn't call myself a dietitian or a doctor, and I went through being all of those things that you've mentioned. I've been vegan, I've been vegetarian. I was for a period of my life, extremely focused on diet, because I felt like I had to be in order to be spiritual. And what I've learned personally, because I cannot speak as a doctor or a dietitian, is that everyone's actually different. Some people work very well on a vegetarian diet. Some people actually do not. And the worst thing about all of this is people who will stand back and look at someone else and say, because you don't eat like I do and have the truth that I do, you're less than me. And so I think that every single person needs to feel into their own body and be honest about what food works for them. And it's not about like picking a diet, like picking veganism or vegetarian or keto or anything like that. The real hack, or the real thing that every human being needs to do, is not focusing on the food at all. It's actually the idea of hunger. We actually have to understand hunger. Why are we hungry? Are we really hungry, or are we just lonely? Are we just bored? Are we just anxious? Are we just depressed? Because you can have in your mind the cleanest diet that you think you could conceptualize based on social media and based on what what you think. But if you're not understanding where your hunger is coming from, then none of that matters. So the real thing to understand about food is understanding, are you truly hungry? Does your body really need food and sustenance? Or are you anxious? Are you depressed? Are you eating for a different reason? And that's the beginning of finding out what food works for you and what food doesn't, is just figuring out, am I even truly hungry? Why am I eating? It's how we eat. Eat slowly and figuring out, are you just trying to fill a spiritual hunger with food? That is the biggest game changer. Andy Watkins. Regarding the harmonic double, what are your thoughts regarding its interaction with Luciferic impulses and energies to undermine the Christ impulse energy? So the harmonic double is basically the harmonic doppelganger. So this is the idea that there's this sort of harmonic spirit and essence that challenges us throughout our life, that's connected with us, that is really the catalyst for us to become better. And there's also in anthroposophy another sort of pole of challenge, which is Lucifer. And they're both representing extremes in the spectrum. So the harmonic energy is hyper materializing, whereas the Luciferic energy is hyper intellectualizing and spiritualizing. But both will kind of draw you out of your body if you're not careful. So typically the Luciferic impulse, how I see it, is the Luciferic impulse can kind of draw you into disassociation. It can draw you into illusion and delusion, right? It can do this through hyperstimulation, through creating feelings of euphoria. But Lucifer really works to kind of disassociate you and draw you out of your body. also through creating fantasies that aren't real, through delusions. Because if you have a belief system that doesn't represent reality, you're automatically going to be a little disembodied because you're not working with a truth. And this is why demonic entities will often lie and create false cosmologies or inversions of things. Because if you're working with an inversion, you're always going to be slightly disembodied, right? Because it's not parallel, it's not attuned truly, it's a little bit out. So you'll be a little bit out. So the Luciferic presence, if adhered to, it kind of pulls you out of your body, it pulls you into disassociation. And then once you're disassociated, there's a part of you that like subconsciously craves to be grounded and subconsciously craves to slow down. And that's when you get pulled into the harmonic energy. That's when you can, that's why in the weirdest parts of the New Age, you see the most Luciferic teachings, but then you'll see this weird undercurrent of like technology. So you'll see all these weird Luciferic delusions and lies about the cosmos and about human beings and spirituality, and then it all is about like med beds or technologies, and it all comes back around basically tech, which is the harmonic impulse. So Lucifer and Ahriman really work together. Lucifer as kind of disassociating the human being out of their body through spiritual delusion and hyperstimulation and intellectual stimulation. And then Ahriman is like a false sense of grounding and can draw you into materiality. Because if you're too far out, you're going to crave coming back down. So they really do work together. And the balancing place is Christ in the heart center for that. So they undermine you through, so Lucifer basically undermines the Christ impulse by drawing you out of your body through disassociation, and then Ahriman creates a false sense of the world to draw you back down, but the whole time you're just disassociated. This is why Rudolf Steiner associates that with an artificial reality of the eighth sphere, where people are being drawn out of their bodies by Lucifer and then pulled back down into this false harmonic world. That's a harmonic world of technology, and that's the dynamic. Okay. This is a member question. What are your thoughts on Saturn and its influences throughout the ages? Many thanks to you and Wolf. You are the bomb diggity. Love you guys. Aw, so glad. So yeah, Saturn is, I think, a controversial planet because in astrology it can be seen as very helpful, but it can also be seen as very challenging. And the same thing is true in, I think, spiritual science, because Saturn really represents kind of like the time before. It represents typically very early developments of humanity. And it also represents sort of the old father. And it's in the chain of the Saturn energy is in the chain of old moon and old sun, and there's old Saturn. So those are very challenging planetary energies compared to other planetary spheres, because they're literally in a chain that is associated with death, with the death process, which is why when you see Saturn, he literally is often portrayed as death. And there's all these gruesome images of Saturn, like you'll see images of Saturn eating his children. And that's to show death. That's to show that backwards pull that the old moon, old sun, old Saturn is. It's literally like a backwards pull. It's literally like a death impulse. So he's a very controversial figure. Saturn is very controversial because he really represents that black sun force. And Edgar Cayce said very tellingly that when a soul has not developed their eye, they have it individuated from the whole, then they get slowly pulled backwards, basically through the black sun corridor that goes old moon, black sun, Saturn. They slowly get pulled back and reamalgamated. Of course, he's talking about also second death there in a very polite way. But, you know, Saturn's associated with the underworld, is the reamalgamation, second death. So is the old moon, so is black sun. These are very difficult planetary energies to understand from the position of the soul. But they also provide an impetus to grow and to develop. We can't evolve without them. So it deals with the shadow. You know, when you have your Saturn return, you have to face all of your attachments. You have to face all of your shadows. And they're hard because that's what that force is. So it is often viewed as a challenging force. And individuals can also get a little bit caught up. And, you know, there's the idea that if you stare into the abyss for too long, the abyss will take you. This happens with Saturn too. And you get these people who will worship Saturn, they'll worship death. And so it's not something to be worshipped. You don't worship Saturn, you don't worship black sun, you don't worship old moon, you don't worship them. You basically overcome and master them within yourself, basically. That's how that works. All right, so let's see. Lynn, could the electrical nature of the etheric body cause metals to stick to one's body? This is really interesting because I do know people who have had this ability to like magnetize. And it is really fascinating because there are also people who have really powerful telekinesis where they can move things. It's very, very, very rare now. But the further you go back in time, the more common it was actually to have highly magnetized individuals or individuals who could basically utilize their etheric body to move things or to light things on fire or to be magnetized. And of course, to magnetize people or to heal people with their hands. This is all etheric body stuff. So I do think that you could definitely have a certain power built up within you that you could have these abilities. They're actually on record. Like you can get certain books and read accounts from people who were doing experiments. And there were individuals who were magnetic. There were individuals who could lift things with their mind. There's all these intense things, physical things that they were able to do by exacting a kind of force with their etheric body. So it is definitely possible, and it has to do with electricity and magnetism within the human being. Okay, Cosmic Drifter. How can I trust that I'm not being fooled by Archons or a demiurge? Just because I don't like the idea of a theory doesn't make it untrue. I know, isn't that the biggest bummer? I believe near-death experiences are real, but they make me suspicious about the entities on the other side. Yeah, there's been a massive campaign that has been going on for, I'd say, 3 or 4 years, saying that when you pass away, you're not supposed to go into the light. And that, like, if a light appears to you, that it's actually basically taking you to the black sun corridor. And so now people have this incredible fear of death, which I think is the whole part of the whole reason why that conversation happens. So, this is the thing, is that this is going back to like the question before, where it's like an issue of self-trust, you know, and you can't allow fear to dictate your life and to dictate your spiritual experience. I'll tell you what, most of the time that people have had these horrific experiences, they really didn't have any idea that they were going on, and it's only in retrospect that they realize what was happening. So a lot of the time when you're actually having a dark experience, it's not as bad as the fear you develop that you develop about it after, is what I'm trying to say. And so a lot of it is what we build up in our mind. So we have to be very careful that we're not building up the fear in our mind, which I think is actually kind of what the purpose of the horror stories and the scary things is anyway, is to make us afraid to die, to make us afraid to become clairvoyant, to make us afraid to spiritually open, because we're just going to be absorbed by Archons and the demiurge. When really the proper, and I would say more realistic explanation of the demiurge and Archons is that these are all forces that are already operating within you. We're talking about like Ahriman and Lucifer. This is part of that. That is demiurge and Archons are kind of like a Gnostic explanation of fallen angels and that dynamic and the reality that there is darkness in the world. But these archetypal darknesses are within the human being already. And we're meant to confront them. We're meant to experience them, and we're meant to overcome them. So we cannot fear this process. All we can do is develop spiritually, humbly, honestly, so that we have the clarity of consciousness to be very present. And unfortunately, like I was saying earlier, and it's not unfortunate at all, it's encounters with our fears that make us stronger. So in a sense, you don't want to like avoid confronting your shadow. Do you know what I'm saying? So there are so many angels, and you also have spirit guides that are always communicating with you, that are always working with you, and that are always on your side. And I think that's also what you have to focus on, because I've noticed that so much of like the conspiracy community, I mean, God love it. You know, we've had so much growth, I think, actually through, you know, different conspiracies flowing around. But a lot of it just gets too paranoid. It can create paranoia, and it can make people afraid to spiritually open. So I think we also have to be careful the kind of content that we consume. Like sometimes it can become too dark and too like doom pilled or black pilled and too conspiratorial until you get this idea of the death process, like your whole death is going to be a trap, and you know, you can never spiritually open to higher essences because they're all demons and you're just going to get tricked. And so I think that we have to be careful that the content that we take in is giving us a parallel and an accurate view of the world. Because if the content gets too conspiratorial, it's going to make you afraid to do basic spiritual things. And I think that's sometimes the purpose of it. It's like, it's too alarmist. It's too conspiratorial. It's not enough dealing with reality, is what I would say. It's like there's so much fear about death, there's so much fear about negative entities that is just hyper focused on it, you know? So no, I mean, your death process is basically being reborn in a higher world. Now, how you do that is based on how you live every single day. It's the thoughts that you think, the emotions that you feel. If you live a life where you are self-examining yourself, if you're developing, then your death process is not going to be something super dark and scary. If you are living a really selfish life, you have tons of attachments to the material plane, if you are totally unawakened and unaware, then your death process will be more difficult, purely because you had so many attachments and lived a cruel life on earth. It has nothing to do with like an archon or a demiurge that's exacting their will on you. It has nothing to do with any kind of like trickery that they're going to manipulate you after death. That process is completely based in your ability to transcend attachment or not, to be able to live a life of love and service or not. It has nothing to do with like an archon or a demi-urge that's just manipulating poor you. No, it's literally your death process is a mirror of your life. It's not a trickery experience. It's exactly based on your life that you live. So all of that stuff, like, yes, there is something called the eighth sphere. Yes, it does involve the moon, but sometimes in the new age and the conspiracy community, it gets really paranoid and it's not healthy. We have to understand the occult science of the thing, not get caught up in the most fearful ideas and be afraid. Your death process is not the same as everybody else's, and it's not going to be you being tricked by demons. It's literally going to be based on whether you have loved, whether you've been compassionate, whether you have lived selflessly, whether you have developed spiritually, and that gives you a certain death experience. And then the opposite of that will give you a challenging death experience for a period of time, because you experience all those desires magnified. So that's that's the death process. Okay, Alexandra Crowers. How does one go about measuring spiritual energy? As in Mu, the magicians were essentially ranked and grouped in accordance to their abilities. Yes. So when you go back in time, back to Atlantis, back to Lemuria, the world was so much more magical, because humanity was basically more directly intertwined with nature. And so the Lemurians were basically magicians. They could, they could affect nature with their mind. But again, keep in mind that at that time, their mind was not fully individuated. So they would sort of just carry out certain things, impulses that they felt, but they were very pure, basically. So in this kind of pre-fall consciousness, it's more like living in complete harmony with the planet and expressing it. And in Lemuria is where we see the first real spiritual powers coming through. So it came actually through women. Women are the mothers of all spiritual experience and the bridge between the spiritual world and the physical world. So the first magicians were women. The first bridges to the spiritual world was the female form and the female body in union with the Father, and expressing that on earth to create inspiration. And then later on, certain males were able to take on these capacities, and they became priests and magicians. And it came out in a little bit of a different way. As time moved forward, women and females began to take on more of the intellect, and you get the balancing out of the polarities closer and closer, epoch after epoch. So, yeah, when you look at Atlantis, you see a very magical society, what we would consider magic today. Um, and a lot of the myths and stories are really about Lemuria and Atlantis, these kind of magical powers and wizards. That was real. That was something that was possible in Atlantis and Lemuria, because we were basically directly intertwined with the etheric bodies of all in creation. So we've moved deeper and deeper into individuality, and now we operate a little bit differently. But back then, it was definitely a time of very high magic, for sure. We had a great influence over the mineral kingdom, and You know, we could see the etheric bodies of different plants. Some people still have this ability. Some people can look at a plant and they can see and sense the spiritual nature of the plant and they know what it heals, which is incredible. And there are people who can do some of these magical things from Atlantis and Mu. It's something that they maintained in their soul. They still have these spiritual powers, which is really incredible. And they'll usually put it to work in their life somehow, usually. So, yeah, really incredible. How does one go about measuring spiritual energy? Well, I think that for the most part, you know, we don't really have a world where there's like public mystery schools in which like initiation and the measuring of abilities was known in society. Like, you know, maybe I think we'll get more and more to that as time passes. We'll return to that a little bit more. But I think for the most part, it's about the individual realizing their spiritual potential and their abilities within themselves. And to do that, you have to turn inward and heal and spiritualize yourself. And then you begin to realize, you know, once you turn inward, you do start to realize who you truly are. You start to realize the talents that you have. You may start to realize past lives that you've had that awaken you. And so I feel like it's really more of a personal journey now, but as we move forward in the future, there may be more mystery schools set up that are reminiscent of Atlantis and Lemuria. Will come back around and repeat that. But now I feel like because so many people don't even believe there's a soul that exists, they don't even believe like in past lives or the ability for the mind to affect matter, that I think it's probably going to be mostly individuals or small groups that talk about this and kind of develop this. Yeah. Okay, this one is from Casey. Hello, Casey. And you said, looking at the music industry, corrupt agreements or contracts, could a soul be sold? What happens to those killed or sacrificed, aka the 27 Club? Can we help them find peace? What of those who appear to benefit when one star dies and one star rises? Yeah, so I think that this is all very much around the idea of the Faustian bargain and making a deal with the devil, and what does that mean, and what is the effect on your soul after death, and what is that bond, what does it really mean? So most people who, like, when you look at music from the 60s and 70s and even a lot of Hollywood stuff, pop culture stuff, a lot of what was going on there was deep occult, deeply, deeply rooted in the occult. And I would venture out to say, in my opinion, the vast majority of people, like in the music industry as we know it, I don't feel like they know what they're getting themselves into. And I think that we're in a time of people not really understanding what the soul is, or the laws of the soul, that they're surrounded by spiritual beings, that there are real demonic forces. I think that a lot of people just don't have any context for it. They weren't raised in a religious family or a spiritual family. They just have no real understanding. And so I think the vast majority of people who get caught up in sort of these Faustian bargains in the music industry and in Hollywood, I think they enter into them not knowing and not understanding. And I think they'll sign their name on the dotted line and they'll participate maybe in certain rituals unconsciously. Now, the people who are trying to recruit these individuals, they know exactly what they're doing, and they often have a process where they beat people down. They try to dominate them. They introduce them to certain individuals, certain experiences that are absolutely there to beat the person down, to demean them in a certain way, to dominate them in a certain way. This goes beyond blackmail or beyond sort of the common ways you'd think. I'm talking on a soul level. But because they don't realize it, they're coming under these influences, and they will come to a point in their life, if they have participated in some kind of Faustian satanic ritual, if they've signed their name on the dotted line and they were not aware at the time, they will come to a certain point in their life where they will be made aware, because certain things will begin to happen to them that they cannot deny. At that point, they will have a chance to leave and move on. Or they will make a real bargain and sink deeper and deeper into it. So in other words, most people who get caught up in the music industry stuff, Hollywood stuff, when they first get in, they don't have any idea. But then, because they're operating in that system, eventually they will. This is where you see a lot of people just peace out. Like, I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to be part of Hollywood. I don't want to be part of the music industry or whatever it is. It's not even just those two industries. There's other industries as well. Things that deal with very high finance. Okay, corporate stuff. It's the same thing. There's a certain level. And if a lot of people will just be like, no, I'm going to peace out. I don't care to be involved. And they leave. And people are like, oh my gosh, you were at the top of your game. Why did you leave? Or why is this person just whatever? And it's like, probably maybe because they woke up to some of the things. Now, maybe there's people that are not involved in it at all and have skirted by. But I think a lot of people probably know what I'm talking about. So eventually, if you come into a contract like that and you're not aware of it, you will be given a point or a few points in your life to see exactly what it is. And you can either go forward anyway, usually because you have just as much greed and lust for power and adoration as the people who are initiating you into it, or because you are so beaten down or whatever it is, you carry on, or you usually will get out of it. So that's what I would say there. If you're unaware, it's different than going in as more aware. It's different esoterically. And you can absolutely pray to you can absolutely pray for people. It's a wonderful thing to do. They will receive your prayers, and it makes a really big difference when you pray for people. And you can also pray for the spiritual hierarchies themselves. Prayer is incredibly powerful. It goes right into the astral plane and has an effect. And it will eventually have a physical effect as well. People who are killed or sacrificed, it's not necessarily the I or the soul essence that's captured. What happens when somebody is in like a black magic sacrifice is that it's actually elemental forces that demonic entities will feed on. Now, those can be kind of united with the I into the soul to a certain degree. But then as time passes, the spiritual and the spiritual planes, it will be separated out. So it's not like if somebody is sacrificed, that suddenly their soul is like dragged to the underworld against their will and they don't deserve it and all that kind of stuff. No, it's really about the elemental forces that are released during that period, and a kind of etheric elemental substance that's released during death that's fed on, not necessarily the direct soul. Does that make sense? Okay. Enough about that. So if you wanna like bring the conversation real down, you just keep talking about that. But you know what? It's necessary that we do talk about that, because if we can't admit that that side of things goes on, then we can't confront it, right? So it is important to realize that that goes on. And a lot of people in that, they need support and understanding, not judgment, so we do have to talk about the dark side if we want to bring about the light. We just got to do it with the proper stewardship. That's all. This is, I think, my issue too with a lot of the topics being covered, is that it's a stewardship thing. So when we talk about spiritual topics, especially difficult ones, your sense of stewardship is more important than the actual topic. That's something that everybody has to think about. Okay. This one is from Leon 19. Okay. Remember, do you believe in destiny or fate? If yes, what is your understanding of it? Best regards. So, if you would have asked me this question when I was 19 years old, I would have said, I don't really think that there's such a thing as destiny. I don't know if there's such thing as fate. I don't think that your life can be fated. I think that your life is what you make it. I think typical millennial consciousness. But the more that I live, I do believe in destiny, and I do believe in fate. And the older I get, the more I believe in it. And I would say that you do obviously have free will as to how much of your fate or destiny you realize and how you realize it. But the very reality that you're born with a soul dictates that you're going to live a certain kind of life, because your soul is going to have a certain kind of impulse. And that's going to form around it through your own expression, a certain kind of life, a certain kind of path, which you could call destiny. The fact that you have certain kinds of interests, the fact that you have certain kinds of talents, the fact that you've lived many lives and have a union with different other souls on the planet is going to lead you to a certain kind of life. So it's not fate in like a planned mundane sense, as in certain events necessarily. It's like the fact that you have a certain skill set, the fact that you are a certain soul creates a kind of fate for you, but you want that because one life is a continuation of another. And so I would say that I do believe that certain things are fated. I think that it's viewed more as like a spectrum, though. I think that you will encounter certain people in your life. Like, for example, you could encounter someone or say it's fate for you to have an experience with a certain person in this life that was very negative to you in another life. So it's in a sense you're brought together in this life, but it's your free will how you treat that person. You can either keep that bad karma going and that negativity going, or you can overcome it and clear it. So I feel like some relationships are fated, or there's a high probability of them going to happen, but what you do with them is up to you. You can kind of transcend the karma that you have with certain people. You can better it, or you can worsen it, I would say. So I would say that they're both. I believe in both to a degree. Yeah. Okay. This one is from Allie. Can you compare the old atavistic clairvoyance to the new clairvoyance in depth? I have a hard time understanding the difference. I understand that it was pre-intellect, but how can we discern clearly which is clearly in someone? Okay. So this is a term that Rudolf Steiner will often use, is this idea of this atavistic clairvoyance, meaning a very powerful and intense clairvoyance that was really more common probably like in the earlier epochs before we had individuated, in which everything was clear. typically what happened is that man was extremely clairvoyant in earlier periods. Even when we go back to like ancient Greece and before, people were actually really clairvoyant. Like when you hear these stories about the little people who were elves and fae that were running around in people's yards, and people were seeing spiritual beings in the sky, angels flying around in the clouds. I mean, that's really what people saw. When there were some people who could look at a person and see their organs in their body. People had the ability to see the etheric world and even the astral world. They could see the beings in there. They could feel what other people were feeling. And as time passed, we began to lose that. We began to lose that clairvoyance, those psychic abilities. And in exchange, we began to get our thinking mind. We began to get objective consciousness where we could do calculations, we could do observation. And when we had that atavistic clairvoyance, we weren't individuals. So we were operating in basically like a hive mind. So we could see these things, but we really didn't understand ourselves as like a distinct entity. We just saw ourselves as part of a whole, which is obviously very beautiful, but it's also kind of like a pre-fall condition, because we're not meant to like exist in that state forever. We're meant to fall out of that state, develop what's called manas in the Eastern tradition, or mind. And when we do that, it's like we have to pass off one thing for another. And so to develop our mind and our intellect and our objective thought, our ability to do calculations, as Rudolf Steiner would say, that also gives us the ability to know ourselves as an individual, which we need to actually transcend eventually the physical plane. We have to be an individual to do that. We don't transubstantiate matter as a group soul. We transubstantiate ourselves as an individual based on our own personal development, right? So once we develop our thinking mind, which happens in the Atlantean era for most people, we begin to lose our clairvoyance. We begin to lose our psychic powers, our psychic abilities, and all that power draws inward inside of us. And we begin to operate totally differently. Now, this goes on and on and on and on until that power of intellect becomes materialist thought and materialism. So that's when we know that we've like gone too far. And now we're in a period of intense decadence and materialist decadence, where we're actually going too far beyond, and we need to begin to return to the spirit world as an individual with an objective consciousness. We need to return to that state of clairvoyance, return to the spiritual world. But there's this movement now that's even taking this materialism and this literalism just to the extreme, And so there's also this incredible longing in our heart to return to that, Eden. There's so many people that talk about returning to Eden, returning to this paradise. There's no returning to Eden. There's no recreating that, because we weren't individuals. So you're not going to recreate Eden exactly. So what it is it's moving into, in anthroposophy, we'd say Jupiter development, which is essentially the higher earth, in which that will be normal again. But moving into that, even in our own earthly cycle, we will begin to regain that atavistic clairvoyance little by little as we return by opening ourselves to spirit, to the Holy Spirit. That's what allows all those abilities to come back online, except now we have an individuality, we've individuated, and so we have it, we kind of have it all, and that's where we begin our ascent. So the old atavistic clairvoyance is the kind of clairvoyance that was like going up out of your physical body and entering into different things, and it's characterized by really the earlier lunar kind of functioning. But I would say the new clairvoyance would be, like in theosophy, typically associated with like the sixth development, the sixth root race. And it's a kind of clairvoyance that is based around the individual. You're not just going up out of your body and entering into things as part of a hive mind, right? That was common in pagan cultures and pagan times. You're literally operating as an individual now, and everything is within you. So you're almost operating exactly opposite. You're operating from everything being within you as a process, rather than having to like project yourself outwards, which is a superior kind of clairvoyance because you're retaining your eye. So some of the old systems will still try to reference like disembodiment, techniques for disembodiment. That's not what we're going for. We're going for complete embodiment and everything happening within you. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay, so it looks like we've already been going for 3 hours. So we are going to do 1 or 2 more, and then we're going to call it a day. Okay, this one is from Andy. Hello, Andy. Hi, Gigi. During your dark nights of the soul, how does one manage their mundane life, work relationships, etc., and not be consumed by the overbearing sadness and pain? How did you manage to see yourself beyond it while still honoring it? You know what? It is hard. You know, I've been through some pretty dark nights, and I would say I've had some dark nights that have lasted years. And the only thing that I can say looking back that really got me through, and this is just me, was my love of God and my belief in God and my belief in goodness. And my belief in that more than anything else. Because if you don't believe in those things, if you don't believe in God, and if you don't believe that God is ultimately the greatest force in your life and that God loves you, then the darkest nights of the soul can become so dark that they can drown you. Because what do you have? So I feel like I got through my dark nights by my love and belief in God. And that gave me not necessarily like a ticket to not feeling my own trauma and my own pain, but it gave me a sense that even though I was suffering, and even though I had to like look at parts of myself that were like embarrassing, and sad and dark, and the trauma, even though I was there, I felt like there was a part of me that was, in a sense, beyond it. There was a part of me that could turn that experience and those difficult times into something greater. And that it wasn't going to make sense now, but that it would one day. And I think that a lot of the times you don't realize how dark things get in your life or are in your life until much later. And you're like, whoa. But the other thing I feel like that's gotten me through dark nights is playfulness. And I feel like Wolf is very good with this. I feel like Wolf is the most incredible person for this in my life. But it's also a sense of playfulness and inner child. I feel like things get really dark when you lose your sense of playfulness. Have you ever noticed that or realized that when you stop allowing your inner child to see wonder or to feel wonder and reverence for the smallest things, that makes the dark nights so much worse. So I also noticed that when I would have a sense of wonder, about life and that lightness, and allow your inner child to come forward. And I'm an Aries, so I feel like Aries have that inner child energy very strong, which maybe helps me. I don't know. But that inner child in you, not like, allowing that to come forward, allowing yourself to have a sense of wonder, because in this life, everything can just get so mundane and so heavy, and it almost seems like you can't have that inner child come forward when it really should be at the forefront of your character to lighten things. So definitely having a sense of wonder and allowing yourself to have that, to know you're not being irresponsible by having a sense of wonder at the sunset today. That's how we should be, right? We should be awed at the sunset. We should be awed when we see a newborn baby or an animal or another human being. We should be feeling awe. And so much of like the dark night of the soul, I think, is disconnecting ourselves from the sense of awe of God in the world, in the smallest things, in the way the sun hits the grass, the fact that the frogs are singing. That is that sense of awe and just gratitude for the smallest things can pull you out of some of the darkest nights. And that's what really got me. And also a sense of sometimes when your darkness is rising, it's not about avoiding it. It's not about like trying to get out of it. It's about being able to be with yourself and to listen. And so what I would also do is I would go into stretches or sometimes yoga postures that directly would deal with the shoulders or the hips or certain parts of the body that I know store trauma. And I would slowly try to move my body and be with it and listen to it. So in life, it's not about being obsessed with being happy or being obsessed with beautifulness and happiness and perfectness. That'll drive you deeper into darkness. You want to find that mid path where you can be with anything yet not get caught up in it. It's very zen, but that's true. So when something is arising with you that's dark, you want to be with that. You want to listen, because that's why it's there. And the more that you listen and the more that you be with it, it begins to transform. And that's when the wisdom starts to come, is when you actually can sit with it. And then when you can sit with it, if you can just light the fire of Christ a little bit in your heart, if you can just notice that it's there, that is also what helps. So my heart goes out to anyone that is suffering in that, but I promise you, if you can sit with it and remember those things, that it will get better, that you can overcome it, that you can get through it, and that God is with you. You have angels with you. You know, Christ is within your heart. You have everything around you. You just can't see it. And sometimes just allowing yourself to feel that and acknowledge that can be the beginning of that light coming over you. And so let that in. Let that in. Okay, we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to do some super chat shout outs. Okay. Zoe, with the etherization of the blood, you discuss movement of the etherized blood up the head, but you also showed one of Steiner's sketches indicating movement from the head down to the heart. Can you talk more on what Rudolf Steiner was indicating with that drawing? Yeah, so it's a circuit. So everything moves in the body kind of like a circuit, basically, like energy is circulated like this. And so you have energy that's coming up from the lower three centers. And usually that tends to be seen as heavier or denser, often untransformed, or that's like the lead, right, in alchemy. And then it moves up into the chamber of the heart where there is the solar fire or the fire of Christ, the furnace. And that's where the etherization occurs, depending on basically your level of spiritual development and ultimately your acknowledgement of God and Christ. That creates actually a different kind of blood that is in your body, actually. But you could also say that it's creates the glorified etheric body as well. And so that actually moves up to the higher glands into the head. And that is of a more spiritual quality. So when it goes into the head, it begins to merge with the astral world in a certain way that draws in higher astral forces. So your etherized blood from your heart center goes up this channel, and it's a different quality than when it was in your lower systems. It's been etherized, it's been spiritualized by Christ. So when it goes up into your head channel, it begins to go into the astral center of your chakras, the astral part of your being, the part of your being that now interfaces with the astral. This is the part of you that interfaces with the etheric. This is the part of you that begins to interface with the astral, and the lower centers is where you're really interfacing more with the physical world. You know, your feet are on the physical ground. Does that make sense? So once you're that channel, you get up and you have that etherized, glorified essence, and it comes into the astral compartment. It draws to it specific astral forces that it would not otherwise be able to bring forward unless it was etherized in the heart center. Okay? So had you not been able to bring your blood and your life essence into your heart chamber and attune it with a higher force, it would remain unchanged and it would go up into the astral aspect and nothing would occur here. It would bring in none of those higher forces. It would just circulate around again in a lowered state over and over again, creating eventually, as Rudolf Steiner would say, a kind of calcification of the body. So there's a lightening that happens with this, a lightening. And so the etherized blood essence and the etherized matter that's attached to it is actually pulling in higher spiritual forces from that astral level, the astral world, and that then gets circulated back down into your system. Okay, so it's like a channel. And that is how we ascend. Like that is the actual mechanics of ascension or the building of your glorified etheric body. Every time you make that pass, you're either glorifying your etheric body or you're separating yourself from it. So yes, the channel downward is the reality that, like, when you glorify the essence in the heart center with Christ, it doesn't just like go up to the top and then like leak out of you right into the astral world through the crown chakra. It goes back around and is cycled through. So, you know, in the example of prophecy or with psychics or spiritual individuals, this is where your initiation is revealed, right? Because when it passes up here, you either have an astral attunement that can pull in certain forces or not. So this is where attunement comes in, and initiation comes in. Is what astral forces are you united with that you can pull in through this process, right? So when the heart is attuned to Christ and everything is being etherized properly, then you can, when the essence comes up here, you can obviously draw in visionary information. You can become very creative. You can receive massive inspiration because you're pulling that in with your attuned essence. And that then goes back down and cycles through your system. Part of it goes off into the cosmos, but part of it is recycled back around in from your Ida and Pingala and your Shishuma channel or your etheric web, your nadis. Yeah. All right. So, you guys, I had such a blast with you today. We covered a lot of things from the dark night of the soul to the music industry to Saturn and the planetary spheres. Yeah, we did pretty good. We did pretty good. So, I'm going to do some super chat shout outs, super chat shout outs. Thank you so much, Dario Dark Angelo, Doyle Wayne, and Sweet Pea 1776 and LMC. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. It means the world. And if you like this, don't forget that I am live every second Sunday on my private platform where I'm also live right now. And I take questions just like this. We go into whatever you want, even often deeper into things I can't talk about on YouTube. But yeah, oh, another shout out, Eyes All Around. Thank you, Eyes All Around. So, yes, if you like this, do consider signing up for my membership site. There's also incredible forums, there's an incredible community there where all of these things are discussed and more. And we do live Q&As there as well, just like this. So I think that's it. Oh, sign up for my newsletter so that you can stay informed as to when there's going to be a lecture or I go live again so you don't miss it. And I think that's it. I think that's it. I think we did it. So, you guys, thank you so much for joining me today. And have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. I'll see you soon.